Hi, I'm Arnie Skelton, and each week in this podcast series, I'm going to offer you my top 10 tips on particular topics or themes that might be of interest to you as a teacher or manager, or both. Hi, and welcome to this week's podcast, which this week is all about something I'm calling revealing preferences. If you've used any of my podcasts so far, you may have heard me talk about currencies, which is people's preference for spending in a particular style or manner that suits them. And this is really what today's podcast is all about. And I'm calling it revealing preferences because the way people communicate and react reveals the way in which they prefer to be worked with, their preferences, their currencies, how they like to spend their way of working. And I'm going to identify 10 of these that I think are really quite important. Now, people may be displaying these preferences quite consciously. It might be quite clear that that's how they prefer to work or communicate, but it's just as likely they're completely unaware of them. And if we can match them, then we're more likely to have rapport with them and may even have greater influence over them. So being able to identify other people's preferences for ways of communicating may in fact be a really helpful way if you're interested in establishing rapport and building a better relationship with people. So it's a two-way street. Remember this, as we go through these 10 preferences, you may be thinking about, I wonder if this person has this tendency or that. So your focus may well be on other people. But remember, you may have some of these preferences yourself. And as I go through my top 10, you may want to check out which of these two pairs of preferences you are more likely to represent. So, here are my top 10, and they're all presented as pairs. Are you more this way or that way? And of course, a couple of things are really important. Firstly, we're not like this all the time. It's not genetic. We may have a predisposition to work in a particular way, but that's all it is. We can change the way we work and the preference we have according to the setting we're working in, the context, and also our particular mood. So these preferences aren't fixed. They're variable, and they may move according to mood and according to context. And remember too that your particular preference may be something that somebody else wants to match. The key point here is that if the two people communicating work well with each other's preference, they're much more likely to get on, be relaxed, and be more empathetic and possibly supportive of each other. So, here are my top 10. They're probably examples rather than preferences. There are probably a lot more than 10, and you may identify other pairings that you think are really important. But these top 10 should get you going. So tip number 1, are you a big picture person or a detail person? Or is the other person a big picture person or a detail person? And what we mean by that is, do you tend to think in terms of the big picture, the landscape, the overview, the summary? Or do you like to talk about details, examples, specifics? If you're a big picture person and somebody talks to you about the detail, you may get a little bit confused and impatient because you want to know the big picture. Equally, if somebody else wants the big picture and you're just spending time on specifics and examples, there may be a disconnection. So the first tip, consider whether you are a big picture or detail person and find out which of those is the preference of somebody else. Tip number 2, emotion and reason. Are you more driven by emotion or driven by reason? Is your nature to be passionate about things, to be engaged at the heart and soul level? Or are you fairly clinical and forensic in your thinking? So which of those two dominate? Now, of course, you may have both in your locker, but under certain circumstances, do you tend to get more emotional in your response or more logical in your response? And what about the other person? Would you say the other person is more cued by emotion or by reason? Sometimes when I'm making a pitch for work, I have to consider whether the people who are listening to the pitch want the reason behind what I'm saying. They want data, statistics, tables of information. whereas other people may want the feelings that the solution will produce in them and others. Will it grab people's attention? Will it make them feel different or better? So it's quite important for me to know whether I'm pitching to emotion or to reason, or perhaps a blend of the two. Tip number 3. Is your reference when making a judgment mainly about and within yourself, or do you refer to other people? We call this an internal or an external reference. So when you are making a judgment or making a decision, do you refer primarily to your own instincts, to your own thoughts and your own feelings in informing that decision? Or do you tend to defer to what other people think and say? There's a really good example of this that we call validation. If you feel at any time that you would like to be validated, to think well of yourself and to be thought well of yourself, do you tend to go to others for that validation? Do you seek validation of you from others? Or are you really good at validating yourself? Trusting your own judgment, your own sense of values and purpose, you are comfortable in your own skin. So that's an example of where we are internally focused if we're self-validating, or externally focused if we need the validation of others. Tip number 4. Options versus procedures. Are you or the other person more likely to like and want and value a range of options from which you can make a choice? Or do you like to be able to know with some certainty the best way forward? So do you like choice, or do you like a decision? Some people just like to follow the way, a routine, a procedure, a process. It gives them comfort to know that they are doing what has been required, what has been laid down, and there's some safety and comfort in that. If you do it that way, you won't be blamed if it goes wrong. You simply followed procedures. You simply followed orders or instructions. On the other hand, by contrast, you like variety. You like the independence of choice. You like to have a number of options presented and you can decide which of those ways is best. So some people may well prefer a manager who is pretty directive, who makes the decisions, who tells that person what to do and how to do it. By contrast, somebody else might prefer an empowering manager who just gives an outline of what's required and leaves it to you to find the best way forward. So, tip number 4, are you someone who values choice and options, or are you someone who prefers to be given the one best way? Tip number 5, are you proactive or reactive? Do you tend to anticipate, look ahead and plan for the future? That would be being proactive. Or do you tend to wait for things to happen and then sort them out, especially if they're going wrong or they're presenting a problem? Do you like to be a problem solver, reactive, or a problem preventer, proactive? There's quite a bit of research literature that suggests many of us prefer to be reactive for a number of reasons. Firstly, if you're busy reacting to problems, the day goes more quickly. Secondly, being reactive is more noticeable. Excuse me. So if you're running around like a headless chicken and fixing things, you get noticed. If you're sitting quietly in a room, pen and paper, sitting back, thinking, planning, deciding on how you might prevent something happening through your intervention, it's kind of harder to see the value in that from other people. You just seem to be sitting there doing nothing. So we perhaps give a premium to people's busyness rather than their effectiveness. Anyway, which is your preference, to be proactive or reactive? If I gave you the choice, for example, on a training course, of spending the afternoon on that course, looking at 3 or 4 scenarios and working through how you might plan to deal with those scenarios over the next 6 or 9 months. Or I could ask you to deal here and now with live problems that are facing me and the group. Which would you prefer, to be sitting down and thinking for 3 hours, or sitting down or standing up and doing for 3 hours? And that might give you an indication of whether you're proactive or reactive. So tip number 5, are you proactive or reactive in your temperament? Tip number 6, QP and R. You'll have heard me talk about this on other podcasts if you've listened to them. And QP stands for quick processor and R stands for reflector. So which of the two do you think you are, predominantly? A quick processor listens to somebody else only until they understand the main point or the gist of what the other person is saying. At that point they want to move on. They get bored with elaboration and further waffle, as they would see it. So having got the main point, they want to come back. So they're very quick at processing, getting to the main idea, but also very prone to interrupt. They don't need what else you're saying. They want to move on and have a response. A reflector, by contrast, always listens fully to what the other person is saying. They almost never interrupt. And they think through, what have I heard? Does it make sense? Do I want to reply to that? If I do, what do I want to say? And can I choose the right words? All of those linear steps take time to reflect. And if you're in a meeting with quick processors and reflectors, quick processors tend to dominate. They just move things forward more quickly, tend to be a little bit impatient, and want to get things done quickly. And they add a lot of energy, and they often add a lot of ideas. But they will cut off and probably marginalise reflectors. And equally, reflectors that are not very strong at diving in and becoming quick processors themselves. So the dynamic of any particular meeting or group can often be more difficult because of the different dynamics of the quick processors and reflectors. So which are you? And what happens if a quick processor meets a reflector in a one-to-one setting? Quick processors may come across to the reflectors as rather pushy, a bit intimidating and in their face, and reflectors may come across to quick processors as a little bit slow, perhaps a little bit tedious, taking too much time. So again, watch out for a mismatch between quick processors and reflectors and consider which you are and whether or not you can match another quick processor and equally match another reflector. That's tip number 6. Are you a quick processor or reflector? Tip number 7. Do you value things being the same or things being different? Do you value stability or variety? Do you value safety rather than risk? Do you like to be comfortable with predictability, or are you bored with same old, same old? Now, of course, as I said earlier at the beginning, these things can change depending on context or the person you're working with or just the mood you're in. But some people definitely have a preference for things being predictable, things being the same, non-threatening, routine, reliable. Others, and I think I'm probably in this camp, get bored very easily. I like some things to change. I'm not threatened by change at all. I welcome it. I would rather be doing something different than be bored out of my skin. Even if it's risky, even if it's not going to last, and even if it challenges me because I'm not particularly familiar with what's required. So it's a temperamental thing. Are you somebody who favours things staying the same or things moving and changing? That's tip number 7. Same or different. Tip number 8. Who do you prioritise, generally speaking? Yourself or other people? Do you tend to maximise your own preference? And we might call that selfish, though I don't necessarily mean selfish. I think it's probably more self-centred. Or do you put other people first? In fact, do you put yourself out to put other people in? So, tip number 8, are you more self-centred or other-centred? And tip number 9, are you more task-focused or people-focused? What matters most to you in your day-to-day work activities? Getting on with the task or making sure you have good relationships with those you work with? And you need to be honest here. most people would want to say, no, of course I'm much more a people person, and I will stop a task in order to spend time with people. And that may well be true. But there are lots of other people who will, perhaps unconsciously, marginalise the person for the task. It's very interesting. If you look at typical appraisal meetings, performance review and development meetings, most of the conversation will be around the task, how people are doing. They were given some key KPIs or objectives, and the conversation is, how well are you doing against those objectives? Are you meeting your KPIs? There's very few appraisals that I know of where people say, and how are you? And how have you been feeling since the last appraisal? And what's your general attitude to things? And how can I make my relationship with you better? I'm not saying those conversations don't exist, but they're much rarer than a task-focused appraisal. And if you're in a meeting, the agenda is probably around tasks, things we want to get done. There's probably almost no meeting that has on the agenda, how are we all feeling today? How are we all feeling since the last meeting? Is there anything here anyone can do to put anybody in a better frame of mind or to help them at work doing the job they're doing? So although we mentally probably want to think of ourselves as people, we're probably more task people than we may want to give ourselves credit for. So, are you task-focused or people-focused? And tip number 10, in terms of motivation, in life as well as in work, are you someone who tends to be wanting to move towards something because it's attractive, it's a carrot? Or do you find yourself more often wanting to move away from something because it's not pleasant, it's hurtful, or it's boring? So some people's motivation is towards, and some people's motivation is away. So again, as I'm working with people, it's really useful for me to know that if they are looking for a solution that I can help them with, is it because they have a vision for something they want to be or achieve, which is moving towards, or are they fed up or frustrated or find the current circumstance too problematic to want to stay there, so they want to move away? So my solutions may often be around helping people achieve the goal that they're after, which is moving towards, or helping to move away from the pain or the difficulty they're facing. So the focus I take in presenting a solution will depend on whether I've read their need to be moving towards something or away from something. So those are the top 10, and I'm going to quickly recap them. Tip number 1, are you big picture or detail? Number 2, are you emotional or more driven by reason? Tip number 3, are your references internal to yourself or external to others in terms of the validation that you seek? Tip number 4, do you like a lot of options to consider? Would you like to have choice, or would you rather be following the one best way that's been given to you? Tip number 5, are you more proactive or reactive? Tip number 6, are you a quick processor or a reflector? Tip number 7, do you value things staying the same, stability, or do you like things to be different? Do you like things to be changing? Tip number 8, are you more self-centered or more interested in putting yourself out to put the other person in, and more other person-centered? Tip number 9, do you prioritize tasks or prioritize people? And tip number 10, in terms of motivation, do you want to or feel that you move towards something or away from something? And just to recap once more, this is about other people and how you can match their currency or preference, and it's also about understanding yourself and seeing which of these 10 areas or pairings you have a priority or preference for. So that's it for this week. Can I just remind you that at the end of this little particular podcast, I refer to my website, which has more information and more options on these and other kind of business issues. And specifically, if you want to log on to my website and send me an email, I have a questionnaire that's based on these top 10 preferences, where you can score yourself and possibly ask other people to score you in terms of where they think you are against each of these 10 pairings. So if you'd like a copy of the questionnaire, just drop me an email and go to my website for that, which is www.effectiveconnect, all one word, effectiveconnect.co.uk. So, thanks for listening, and bye for now. Hi. If you find these podcasts interesting and useful, you can also find them on my website, which is www.effectiveconnect, all one word, .co.uk. So www.effectiveconnect.co.uk. And as well as these podcasts, you'll also find a lot of other useful learning and development material. So couldn't recommend it more. Go and have a look, see if there's anything there you'd like. www.effectiveconnect.co.uk. Bye for now. Thank you for listening. If you've enjoyed this podcast, make sure you subscribe. You will still get the podcast for free, but you will also get an alert to let you know when the next podcast is available. And please recommend the podcast to anyone else you think might like it and benefit from it. Also, I'd really appreciate it if you could leave a review and any other comment, because they'll help promote the podcast series on the relevant platform. So, bye for now.